we are now the barbarians. We've learnt everything that came from those who came before us, like the prior founding fathers of the US, the Mises of the world, the Spenglers of the world, and all this sort of stuff. We're extracting the thinking and the civility and the structure from them, but we're coming up with a new fucking energy that is barbarian-like, that is hungry to claim, to build, to create, to conquer. We're going to combine those two. And funny enough, a lot of us either traveled or nomadic in some sense, or we are flexible. We have the ability to move if we need to, or at the very least, our probably the word is we are more sovereign, right? Which is what the Germanic tribes are. So there's almost like an echo of that period. And the foundations that we established today, in 1,000 years, the civilization that will come then will be, in turn, 1,000 times or 100,000 times more powerful than what the US is today, which is, in other words, we're setting the foundations for going to the stars.
This rip of TFTC was brought to you by River. It's the best place to buy Bitcoin. Go to river.com/TFTC and enjoy this episode.
Ooh. Very timely conversation. It's the day after the 4th of July here in the United States. You've written another book, The Bushido of Bitcoin. And we're here to talk about beauty, truth, and the interregnum, the weird time that we find ourselves in. Mm-hmm. How's it been? I mean, I read the prelude, I read the chapter about beauty. It seems like you've been on an intellectual journey the last couple of years writing this book and learning as you were writing it.
Very much so, man. The last time you and I actually did a rip was about, I think, a year and a bit ago. And we were, actually, maybe it was even the one before that. I don't know. Like, we've done a few, but we spoke about the Bushido of Bitcoin back then. And it was still, it's like in its proto stage. I would say I was at like draft 2. What I sent you was from draft 7, I think, or draft 6 or something like that. So the book's come a long way. Back when I first wrote it, it was going to be more of a look at the Japanese virtues during the samurai era and the virtues that Bitcoiners seem to be living by. And I was going to do some sort of parallel thing. And it was going to be a short book, like 25, 30K words, maybe 40K words, but it's like blown up into, it's longer than the Bitcoin standard. I think the Bitcoin standard is about 100K. This is about 125K. So it's about a 25% longer. And yeah, man, writing the book has been a real journey. You look at the difference between who I was when I started writing the book. I'd gone through a little bit of a rough period. I had to step down from my duties at Amber as a CEO, couldn't be financial services CEO anymore, all this sort of stuff. And then obviously wrote the Uncommunist Manifesto and lockdowns and screeching and yelling at people and all this shit. And then I started writing the book. And it's funny, I went through the book, the original draft or one of the early drafts a couple of weeks back, and I just saw the difference in the tonality back then. It was more about pointing out what was wrong with the world. And the book has shifted into acknowledging what's wrong, but then calling for something greater, which is the need for us as those who will inherit the earth, socioeconomically speaking, to go and claim back. We need to get on offense and get the fuck off defense. And, a lot of the book is my journey from being, quote unquote, NPC Bitcoiner to hopefully something more vital, alive, and ascendant. So that's one of the strong messages of the book.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people are having this realization to shift from maybe some would deem complaining to action. Mm-hmm. I'm curious to get your thoughts. I've had a very similar journey. I'm not sure if you've seen some of the stuff I've been saying on other podcasts and on this show, which is like, all right, we need white pills. We need to stop posting and just complaining about everything. But you're right. Like 2020, 2021, 2022, particularly just seeing everything that was going on globally with the lockdowns, the money printing, the forced injections, it was almost impossible not to say, holy crap, what the hell are we
Mm-hmm.
doing right now? And almost shaking with anger, pointing at everything that was going on. And then I don't know if it was just a battle of attrition and um, the people just got tired of complaining. But I feel like in the last year or 2 years, maybe the price of Bitcoin going up has emboldened people. It's really shifted from like, all right, screaming and pointing at all this stuff is not solving the problem. We need to go out and actually do something.
I've felt that shift in energy, and actually, that was one of the big reasons why I wanted to jam with you again, because you are one of the what I would consider one of the few Bitcoiners who comes from that place of like, no, 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 we're not going to cuck to this message, and we don't just need to keep complaining. And I've always respected your position, particularly with the energy stuff. Like, we did that energy edition last year for the Bitcoin Times, and you and I resonate a lot on that. We don't need to go and play to their narratives and all this sort of shit. It's like, no, this is the fucking paradigm. This is the argument. And you win by bringing them onto your territory, which is it's a very offense oriented approach. It's not a defense oriented approach. Trying to placate your fucking enemies and trying to justify yourself within their paradigm comes from a place of weakness. It's bullshit. So to your point, like there's been a palpable shift, and I can sense it. It's not everywhere. There's still all these stupid accounts like fucking Clown World and End Wokeness and all this sort of shit who just sit there and like ridicule stuff. And there's almost like three stages, right? There's like the black pill / red pill where everything's fucking shit and you're just like pointing out everything that's wrong and you're complaining. Then there's like maybe the transcendent red pill, like, the pink pill, whatever, like the color changes a little bit and you're ridiculing everything. And, I think we went through that phase quite a bit last year, which was everything was just a joke. And I think in many ways that was necessary because we had to ridicule these idiots. Like, I mean, literally the most powerful nation in the history of humanity, the head of that is a fucking guy who can't put a sentence together. Like, it's literally a fucking joke. But there comes a time when we all need to put our big boy pants on and stop being like teenagers ridiculing stuff and actually become adults and go and claim the space back, claim the territory back, and actually do something about it. And that's a big part of the message of this book, where there's like chapters in there which are called like a new heroic age, like this call to rebuild a civilization in a way that is ascendant again, instead of decaying. And that's going to require work and effort. It's not just, oh yeah, Bitcoin fixes this, and sit like a bunch of the lol libertarians. This is why, like, I've also stopped being a fucking libertarian. Like, it just doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. It's a ideology of, how can I put it? Like, it's an ideology of retreat, apathy, and defense. And you don't win anything through those modalities. You have to go and claim space. You have to attack. You have to be on offense. You have to build territory. You have to produce. You create. This is a forward-moving motion. And I have changed politically, philosophically, psychologically in many ways, and the book is quite a reflection of that.
Yeah, and so I guess let's jump into it, because it seems like we're at a point in time, again, you describe it as this interregnum where the people who would like to affect change in the world sort of need to rediscover the virtuous framework from which to operate to bring about this type of change that we would like to see, this ascendant change. And so with that in mind, how would you describe this framework? What are the core virtues that people should really be honing in on and trying to sharpen and develop if they don't have them already?
Yeah, so let me add some context to this, more broadly speaking. So you've got civilization, right? And civilization is the society we're in, the norms, the cultures, the people, the religions, the government, and all this sort of stuff like intertwined in one. Now, what helps or what establishes the civilization, or a better way to say it perhaps, is what is upstream of civilization is culture. But the thing that's upstream of culture is virtue. And a good way to think about virtue is like, imagine the word principles and behavior combined, right? So virtue is how you live and the principles that you live by. And when I was researching this book, particularly as I moved into draft 2, 3, 4, I started off with a real focus on the Japanese feudal period, and particularly the samurais, which is the namesake of the book. Like Bushido means way of the warrior, and it refers to like a moral code or a code of virtue that the warrior class of Japan was basically expected to embody. It wasn't like a constitution. It wasn't written down and like some fucking micromanaged, oh, you have a 7 out of 10 on justice and an 8 out of 10 on courage. Well, it wasn't like that. It was an expectation, and these virtues were things that, as I said, the warrior class lived by and that people recognized. So I started there, but then I looked at the feudal age of Europe and Christendom and the medieval knights and the Arthurian legends and all this sort of stuff, and the chivalry as a concept. And I found that the same kind of virtues which were embodied by the Christian knights were exactly the same as what the Japanese knights had. And then I looked at the Romans and the Greeks and the Macedonians, and you had this like massive overlap in the virtues, particularly of the warrior class, who were the class of people who did two things. They inspired those below them because they were their defenders, and the classes above them, the nobility, the aristocracy, the royalty, because they were dependent on their protection. So the warrior class is, in my opinion, the most important class in a civilization, and they inspire, or they set the stage for the kind of virtues that emanate the rest of society. So I looked at all of these, and lo and behold, they overlapped, and they came to produce the greatest civilizations on Earth. And as those civilizations decayed, what else did we notice? A trading of those virtues, of those behaviors, with money, with whether it was money printing or just the transformation of culture into more of a trader culture or more of a merchant culture, the elimination of the warrior class, all this sort of stuff. Like things became soft, and the softer a culture became, the softer a civilization became, the more it tended towards decay. So with that framing in mind, I was interested in what these virtues are, because as we move on to a new socioeconomic standard, and I'll say the namesake of the book is Bushido of Bitcoin, but when you read the full book, you'll notice that I don't talk about Bitcoin in there. Like I'm not interested in like the history of money or the fucking how Bitcoin works and the technicals. Like that's been done to death. There's 1,000,001 books about that shit. What I'm interested in is assuming we move to a new socioeconomic standard, which is likely going to happen. The current socioeconomic standard cannot last because it's misaligned with life, right? Like you can't just fucking print money ad infinitum. You can't just keep behaving as if women are men are women. You can't just keep transgenderizing everything and black is white and white is black and up is down. You can't do that without something breaking at some point. So we're going to move on to a new socioeconomic standard, and most likely that is going to be a Bitcoin standard, because Bitcoin is so much more economically and socially powerful than anything else that stands. So if we're going to move on that, what are the virtues? What are the ways we must behave in order to succeed on that standard? Because right now, to succeed on a fiat standard, you need to be really good at lying, at cheating, at stealing, at getting into politics, at fucking manipulating, at being a weasel, at being a parasite, at sucking stuff from the system, right? That's the behavior that's rewarded on this broken standard. Whereas on a more sound standard, where institutionalized lying, stealing, and cheating is made much harder, we need to behave differently, and a different set of virtues, a different set of characteristics will be demanded for people to rise up. And I'm not saying demanded by decree. I'm just saying demanded because that's what works on something more sound and something more functional. And yeah, the virtues that I selected were things like, and I'll just read them out here really quickly so that people are aware. So it starts off with justice, then courage, then compassion, honor, integrity, responsibility, excellence, respect, duty and loyalty, and finally restraint or self-control. And the last thing I'll say on this sort of virtues piece before we dig into some of these is one of the really powerful things, and it didn't even hit me in the beginning, but it hit me more towards the end, is virtues transcend morality and they transcend beliefs. They transcend all of these things because we'll have many, many beliefs. Like there's Christianity, there's Islam, there's like, Buddhism, there's all these different religions. And within religions, there's like how many sects of Christianity is there? How many sects of Islam is there? All this sort of stuff. Like there's many variants. But virtues transcend these things because it doesn't matter which creed you're from or what belief you're from. Like you recognize courage, you recognize honesty and integrity, you recognize self-control, and you recognize that not just intellectually, you recognize it in your blood, you recognize it in your DNA. Like I remember the movie that shaped me as I was a young teenager was Braveheart with Mel Gibson, and it's etched into my mind, particularly the scene towards the end where he's asked to pledge allegiance to Edward the Longshanks, and he refuses to. And even, on the rack, his guts are being cut out, and they're like, "Look, the suffering will stop if you just but pledge allegiance, kiss the robe." And he yells freedom, and his head is chopped off. Like that is courage. That is fucking next level integrity, responsibility, duty. Like all of these virtues, and we feel that, and that's why it moves us emotionally. Whereas like beliefs and everything have that same effect, and people can have different ones, but even enemies, even people with differing beliefs, recognize these virtues. And virtues are also much harder to fake than morality because a virtue is a behavior. Whereas people like browbeat each other over fucking, I'm more moral than you are, I'm more moral than you are. It's fucking bullshit. Like it's more theoretical. Whereas virtue is far more practical. So with that all being said, we can kind of dig into some of the virtues, but that's sort of like why I focused on that and why I believe virtue as a concept is so important and why it's going to be critical for us as we're going to be the new socioeconomic elite, whether it's Bitcoiners or producers, creators, business owners, or whatever. Like those who inherit the earth will have a duty, will have a responsibility to make it better, because the idiots that came before us certainly didn't make it better. And I think these are the virtues that will help us along that path.
This episode was presented by River. River's the best, most secure place to buy Bitcoin in the United States. Go to river.com/TFTC, set up an account today. You'll be able to DCA into Bitcoin without paying any fees. You'll be able to give people Bitcoin via River links. You'll be able to send and receive Bitcoin over the Lightning Network, and you'll be able to set limit orders. If you want to buy Bitcoin at a particular price below or above where it is now, you can set orders to buy Bitcoin when it hits that price. Go to river.com/TFTC and set up your account today. This trip was also brought to you by our good friends at Unchained. Unchained is building a financial services platform for a Bitcoin standard. They have over 7,000 clients that are securing over 90,000 Bitcoin with 12,000 keys on their platform. Their platform leverages Bitcoin's native multi-sig properties. Their cornerstone product is their Vault product, a 2 or 3 multi-sig Vault, which allows you to hold 2 of 3 keys in a multi-sig quorum. That gives you full control over your Bitcoin. They also have an IRA product, a lending desk, and they're rolling out a bunch of other products, including an inheritance protocol and sound advisory. So go to unchained.com, set up a call with their concierge onboarding team today. Tell them that TFTC sent you and use the promo code TFTC at checkout. Unchained.com.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you chose justice as number one. I was just thinking here as an American looking around at the state of the country, and you just have people looting stores because the district attorneys and the police departments have decided not to enforce laws that have been around for centuries, simple laws which is don't steal or you'll go to jail. Now that has been completely ripped away from society for some reason or another. You look at the witch hunt going on with Donald Trump and the trial that he's going through, and it seems like something that is pivotal to ensuring a society that actually operates appropriately is justice, the defense of private property via the legal structure and the enforcement of that legal structure. It seems to be completely eroding here in the United States. And so a reemergence of justice is definitely one of the low-hanging fruits that I can look out at the world and recognize as something that desperately needs to be brought back to our society, especially here in the United States.
It really does start with that. It's like there's a samurai or a feudal Japanese, more accurately speaking, quote, and I'm going to butcher it here, but it's sort of that justice is the skeleton. So it's kind of like the framework upon which everything exists. Now, what's interesting about these virtues and that I found is there's almost like a tension between them. So like if you develop a society purely on just like raw justice, you can be too rigid, right? And there's this concept that we're familiar with, particularly in the West, which is this idea of letter of the law and spirit of the law. And Germans are funny this way. Like everything that they see is like letter of the law. Like you jaywalk and then you go to jail, right? It's like fucking relax, bro. There was no cars coming. But there's like compassion adds some flesh to the skeleton that is justice, and it's important to have a balance of both. And what's happened in Western civilization is we've leaned so far into compassion and so far into these softer virtues, which are necessary. Like you must have compassion. You can't just build a civilization without it. But if you discard justice, if you discard responsibility, if you discard all these other things for the sake of just elevating compassion, which is what I'd say a lot of the naive left does. So a lot of these people who are naive and leftism, compassion, all this sort of stuff is far more feminine as well, right? Compassion is a feminine. It's the yin. It's fundamentally the yin to justice. That's one of the chapters in the book. You start to feminize society. You start to weaken it. You start to soften it. It's kind of like a mother who babies her son, and he becomes basically a soy boy, right? Like that's essentially what's happened to civilization. We've just babied everything. And I did a tweet the other day actually because, man, I was so pissed off. I was driving from, so I'm in Spain at the moment. I was driving from Zaragoza to Madrid, which is literally straight shot highway the whole way. And there's no one on the fucking road. And when I'm driving like on a straight shot highway, high speed, I don't stay particularly in the lane when there's big curves. Like I, go through the lanes to make the turn more efficient and faster, right? And the car is just like, those the sensors of like crossing the lanes, and like every time I'm crossing lane, the thing's steering, and when I go to park, like everything's beeping, and like the cars have just been turned into these like nanny mobiles, like that are telling you everything. Nobody knows how to reverse park anymore without a camera, for example. It's fucking insane. So I wrote a tweet about it. I was like, we've zoomified and boomified civilization. It's like a nanny state meets it's like a nursing home meets a playpen. There's no more adults anymore, and anybody who has the capacity to be an adult, who has the capacity to have responsibility, to make a decision of their own, etc., is basically forced into these humiliation rituals of stupidity, right? Like you can't walk through an airport without basically getting undressed and naked and groped by some fucking retard TSA agent, right? You can't, like in Europe, like, man, it's atrocious. Like you can't go and join a gym without bringing your passport. Like I went to join a gym the other day because I just wanted to train for a week. I was like, look, can I just buy a day pass? And they're like, no, you need to bring your passport to verify identity. I'm like, what fucking planet are we living on? Like, so it drives you insane. And that's a function of going so far to the left, so far into the yin, so far into the feminine, so far into one particular dimension of existence, and discarding all of the other ones, which are fundamentally more masculine, more rigid, more sharp, more hierarchical, but necessary if you want to build a functional and hierarchical and vital civilization. So anyway, I don't know what your comment was. I've kind of gone off on a tangent there, but I think that's just something that came to me that is really, really important for us to consider.
No, on this line of the feminine versus the masculine too, I actually saw, I think somebody reposted a 4chan post on Twitter the other week, and it was in the context of illegal immigration and the fact that it has been allowed to basically escalate to an alarming rate here in the United States. And the 4chan post was essentially like, yeah, this is very, feminine and just went into like the historical context of war and people conquering lands. It's like the women don't actually care because they don't get killed. They eventually marry the conquerors while
Correct.
they can get killed. So it's a very feminine, to your point, like this over-indexing towards the feminine trait of compassion has enabled something like egregious illegal immigration here in the United States and other parts of the West to really proliferate.
Totally. It's like, come in with open arms. We'll adopt everybody. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you know, this is very actually biological, because a man biologically seeks to plant his seed somewhere, and he will optimize for that, unless he's by definition a cuck, right? That's what the definition is. I'm not trying to insult anyone. And men have traditionally, like, borders, the concept of a border, the concept of a demarcated territory, the concept of protecting private property is masculine. The concept of exclusion is masculine, and a border is exclusive. There is inside, there is outside. And compassionate people, people who index on compassion, they want to be nice, and they don't want borders. They want to be nice to everyone, all that sort of stuff. And it's as I said, for the there's these naive people that it comes from a good place, but it's misguided. And the ramifications of that misguiding are that, like, you let the wolves, into the into the pen, right? And that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. And ultimately, it's then up to men to clean it up. Now, this is ultimately all men's fault anyway. Like, I would even argue that it goes back to the French Revolution, which was where the original element of feminization came, is that Louis XVI, as the father of the then most powerful empire and state in the world, was feminine. He was a bitch. If Louis XIV existed when Louis XVI was around, there would not have been a French Revolution. There would not have been communism. There would not have been leftism. There would not have been World War I, World War II, all the other shit that came after it. But because the little father, who the king in France was known as, was literally decapitated for being a weak man, and he was decapitated thanks to, and we can get into all sorts of conspiracy theories, but like the trader class, I won't name who, came in, they usurped the nobility with a fake new aristocratic rich class that wanted to then weaponize the populace by training the intellectuals, the original left. So the Jacobins were the first leftists, and they're the ones who basically inspired Marx and communism later on. They took over France, destroyed it, figuratively and metaphorically chopped the head off the father. That was when divorce was first legalized. That was when women were weaponized to get men who were otherwise not part of the warrior class to conscript and join the army, become soldiers, not warriors. There's a big distinction there. A warrior is there by choice. A soldier is told what to do. A warrior is a defender and a leader. A soldier is a follower. So there's a big difference between these two. They're often the same, but there's a fundamental energetic difference. But all of this stuff happened with this inversion of a functional patriarchy early on. And I don't say this in any way to like blame women. It's actually men's fault for being too weak to hang on to the duty and the responsibility of leadership and of maintaining the structure of civilization. And slowly by slowly, that's where we got today. Like, one of the big realizations that I got from reading the book, we always say as Bitcoiners, Bitcoin will fix this, the money is the root problem. I realized that money is actually not the root problem. Money, the printing of the money is an accelerant. And it's almost like that's when the tumor becomes malignant. That's when the cancer, like the point of money printing is when the cancer emerges, and then it starts to multiply and it kills the system. But what caused the cancer is upstream. Drinking fucking seed oils and Coca-Cola and getting no sun and all of the bad shit that we know for health leads to the cancer. So if you look at the West, we didn't just like randomly start printing money one day. We weren't like a strong, powerful, vital civilization. And, one morning we woke up and we're like, fuck it, let's just print some money. Like, that's not how it happens. Like, the decay sets in earlier, and there's things that happen upstream which slowly devolve into that. And maybe in many ways as a counterpoint, like, we had to go through this as the West. We had to become affluent, and in becoming affluent, we became more kind, and becoming more kind, we became more egalitarian. Becoming more egalitarian, we became more accepting and more compassionate and all this sort of stuff. And slowly, like, instead of maintaining some link to this sort of exclusion component, we opened everything too wide. And now we're suffering the consequences of that, and we're going to have to unwind some of this stuff. But it's happening. I can see a change in energy already.
Quick break here, freaks. This rip is brought to you by Gradually Then Suddenly, a framework for understanding Bitcoin as money by Parker Lewis. I wrote the foreword to the book. I'm honored to have done so because it's the best 0-to-1 primer if you're looking for a logical explanation of why Bitcoin obsoletes all other money. Buy one for yourself and maybe a few for your friends. Go to thesafehouse.com/gradually. That's thesafehouse.com, safe spelled SAIF, thesafehouse.com/gradually. Use the promo code TFTC for $5 off at checkout. Buy it now, freaks. The price of Bitcoin is going up. You need to understand it. This is the best 0-to-1 primer. This rip was also brought to you by our good friends at Zaprite. If you're a Bitcoiner and run a business or an independent contractor, you should be accepting Bitcoin as payment. If not you, then who? If we believe that fiat is systemically fragile and is a risk, the rails that currency runs on are a risk as well. You need to begin accepting Bitcoin as soon as possible. Invest in the future of your business. Create a redundant rail by accepting Bitcoin as payment using Zaprite and reduce risk for your business. I've done this for my business. Here at TFTC, we use Zaprite. It allows you to easily create invoices, payment links, or connect e-commerce stores, connect your wallets or custodial accounts, and be set up in minutes. We can also connect our bank accounts, our Stripe accounts, or Square accounts to accept fiat as well. The time is now, freaks. The fiat system is fragile. Invest in the infrastructure that de-risks the future. Invest in yourself. Bitcoin payments with Zaprite. Go to zaprite.com/TFTC to get $40 off their annual subscription. Zaprite.com/TFTC, $40 off.
It's hard because that over-index towards compassion, it confuses the masculine side of things too, because they're browbeaten if they try to put forth an alternative view that is against illegal immigration, that is against stealing, that is against trying to convince the world that there's more than two genders and that you can transition from one to the other. In this late stage fiat, at the beginning of this interregnum, it seems that the browbeating has really held back those of us who would like to sort of push forth a masculine view of the world and a retaking of the virtues that could lead to a high functioning and ascendant society. But with that being said, like, again, like, is that why you believe we're officially in the interregnum? Because it does seem like cancel culture has a diminishing marginal return these days, where people don't care if you call them racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever it may be, because it's become glaringly obvious that those are nothing more than toothless tropes that are used to silence people instead of actually get to the core of an intellectual argument.
Totally. I mean, all of these things, like the more you use something, the more the person you're using it against recognizes it, right? So these idiots think that they can just use the same narrative again and again and again and again, and that everyone's going to keep falling for it. But to your point, like, are we in the interregnum? And we very much are. Like, I don't know if this is there's probably interregnums within the interregnum, right? Like, these fractals exist all the way up, and we're at a point where public discourse is changing, but we're also at in the middle of a economic interregnum, which is the time between, like, when Bitcoin was announced in 2008. Pre-Bitcoin was the pure fiat era. Once Bitcoin came out, we are now in the interregnum era, which is Bitcoin and fiat. Bitcoin is ascending, fiat is descending, and at some point, fiat will completely die and Bitcoin will take over. Now, I don't know if that's 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, whatever. It's going to take quite a bit of time, in my opinion, because I don't think culture and civilization just like switches that quickly. I think this is probably a big blind spot with Bitcoiners. We often get caught with our pants down because we over project what can happen in a particular period of time, and that's a large function of Bitcoin's volatility, and everyone, like, you get a bit of a pump and like, yeah, we're all partying thinking we're going to take over the fucking world, and then you get a bit of a dump, and then all of a sudden everyone's like in justification mode, like, oh, it's okay, hodl. It's like, all right, bro. It's all a little bit funny. But to your point with the interregnum, there's a shift in the energy, and it's a very, very good shift. And I think a real highlight with that shift was actually Millet winning at the end of last year, right? He is the right energy, right? I did an article about that last year, which was basically Millet is like the energy of Trump and the economic literacy of a Ron Paul. You kind of mix those two together and you get dynamite, right? Like, he's got passion, he's got energy, and more than his economic literacy, that passion and energy is what tapped into the youth and what attracted people to him. People are like, oh yeah, well, they voted him in because of his policies. I was like, nobody voted shit in for fucking policies. They voted him in because of the affinity they sensed with him. They were sick and tired of this kind of, these sleazy scumbag shithead politicians. And in many ways, that's what attracts people to Trump. Like, I always find it funny how Bitcoiners forget that Trump was an entrepreneur first. Like, to be an entrepreneur and to be a successful one, you need to be a people person. You need to have your finger on the pulse. You need to have a sense of a trend or of an idea or of the people you're involved with. And Trump has a hugely uncanny ability to put his finger on the right energy at the right time. And I mean, sure, he's 75, whatever years old he is, 76, but the guy's got, honestly, more energy than most people half his age. He's just got a swagger about him. And in fact, I would argue that there's probably no person in the world where you could just see the silhouette of the person and you know who it is. I don't think a person like that exists. So he comes with a lot of benefits. Sure, he might be economically literate in some capacity here and there and whatever, some of his policies or whatever, but people who sort of ridicule that, it's like, okay, bro, go and do better, dickhead. Like, don't be, you're the person in the stadium pointing and LARPing, when if you know so good and you know so much, go and do it yourself, make it better. So there are these leaders emerging, and to sort of tie it back to Millet, he was a real shifting point, because he just energized a big part of the world, and he almost united people who, like, he united both sides of the bell curve, right? So the midwits fucking hate Millet. The people on the left side of the bell curve, the low IQ and the super high IQ, he met both of them. He met the low IQ because of his energy and because of the magnetism, and he met the high IQ because he could back it up with the logic and the reason. And then all the midwit losers, and I fucking love the midwit meme. It's the greatest meme ever created. Like, it's just so representative of civilization. It's like all the midwits, all the losers, all the leftists, all the people who are just like total mids. They hate him, they hate Trump, they hate Bukele, they hate all that sort of stuff. And I'm enjoying this change. I enjoy laughing at those people because they are now fundamentally losing. And there's a great saying. It's like you scratch a leftist, and underneath you find a violent Bolshevik who wants to kill everybody. And that's essentially what these people are. Like, their backs against the wall, and now they're behaving like the rats that they are, which is vicious, little turds, because now that nobody's interested in their shit anymore, they're going to kick, scream, and bitch and do everything that they can to, like, tear everything down. But ultimately they lose. Fuck them.
Yeah. No, and this gets into one of the core virtues, which is courage. It seems like there are many people rediscovering their courage. Again, it's like, you can call me whatever you want. I think it's proving not to be effective anymore. And I think Millet, a great example of igniting that courage in the Argentine people. I mean, because if you think about what he did from an economic policy perspective, like, it was a massive shift from the status quo of the last 100 years in Argentina. And that took a lot of courage.
Yeah, took a lot of courage, took a lot of, a sense of justice. It's like, okay, well, this is what we're going to do because it's the right thing, not because it feels nice, because it's not going to feel nice. Like these economic reforms are going to hurt people in the short term. But he had the courage to go through it, and he had the magnetism to, to get people to trust him along the way. And that's a really difficult trait, right? Like, because most people are not going to sit down and read Mises to understand, where Malay's coming from. This is not going to happen. But if his character is magnetic enough, people will go with it and trust it. And it's actually interesting. In many ways, the left was better at doing that over the last couple of decades. They had more charismatic, quote unquote, leaders or politicians, and they actually were able to pull people towards them because on the right, what did you have? Fucking George Bush. Sure, he was funny, relatively charismatic, but he was retarded, right? And, you had that with a number of these prior politicians. So the left beat the right in terms of that charisma, that magnetism, that energy. Like Obama, as much as I hate the guy, like he was a brilliant orator, and he had this, the way he carried himself and the way he presented himself was very polished, and it came with a level of magnetism. But now, our side, the ascendant side, the alive side, the vital side, the strong side, is getting that with Bukele, with Milei, with Trump, and there's obviously other examples rising up now in Europe, etc. And this is a good thing. This is all a good thing, and this is part of our journey through, as you said, that interregnum and rediscovering the virtues that matter, and hopefully embodying them ourselves.
Yeah, and I guess something to bring up that we should definitely touch on is like, how do you, once rediscovered and implemented and the fires lit in everybody's belly, to have the courage to go out and pursue justice and all these virtues that you write about in the book? How do we preserve that? And does a tool like Bitcoin create the possibility to preserve it? Because in a world that runs on a Bitcoin standard, I think you mentioned it in the chapter on beauty, like competence, meritocracy is rewarded, and there's no way around it, just due to the way that the monetary system works.
Yeah, so this is something I grappled with for almost like 50 pages in the book. There's a section, so section 3 of the book is called integration. So after I do the virtues, and just for people who are interested, like the virtues aren't just me describing what the virtues are. Like I go into the etymology of the virtues, and not just a single English etymology. I go into the Latin, the Greek, the Proto-Indo-European. I go into the Japanese and the Chinese etymology, and it's absolutely fucking fascinating. We spoke about overlaps earlier of virtues. The overlap of like the very makeup of these words. Like in Japan, like you literally have pictograms, and what the pictograms mean is the same thing as what in the West the roots of the word mean, whether it's excellence, whether it's responsibility, whether it's compassion, whether it's courage. All of these things, they mean the same thing. It's fucking mind-blowing. So after I go through the virtue section, I go through this discussion about integration, and I basically open up that chapter to say, how do we integrate these virtues into our modern society, and even more importantly, into a future postmodern society? Is it even possible in the current paradigm, or does there need to be a wholesale shift away from where we are? Do we have to build something entirely new? And if so, what are the challenges we will face along the way? And then the section specifically, it explores 4 areas. It explores culture, governance, wealth, and cycles. And this last part is where I'll sort of try and answer your question, which is seasons and cycles are unavoidable. and this is something like I had to soberly come to admit. And in fact, a lot of us Bitcoiners, we kind of get this maybe because of the Bitcoin cycles, or because many of us are sort of Austrian economists or Austrian literate. And we understand that things ebb and flow. And in fact, the central planners are quite often the idiots who think that they can somehow skip cycles, right? So there's like a business cycle, you overextend yourself too much as a business. Oh, here's a solution. Let's print more money and let's prop up the fake businesses. Like, no, you fucking idiot. You're supposed to shrink if you've overextended. So that there needs to be these sort of ups and downs. These are natural. So if that's the case, like if cycles are going to exist from literally down to the way the electrons orbit around an atom, up through to how our cells, go through a cycle, and they grow, they live, they die, through to how we as human beings have a cycle of life, through to the seasons, through to the orbit of the planet and everything. Everything seems to have a cycle. If cycles are always going to exist, the question is not how do we avoid the cycle, or how do we try and create a structure that ignores the cycle. You can't transcend it. You can't avoid it. The question becomes more of how do we create a structure that can withstand the winter when the inevitable winter comes. So there's like this sort of fourth turning-ish idea of generations, right? There's going to be periods of time where the generation that takes hold is going to be just far more entitled, bratty, materialistically wealthy. And there's a section in the book where I talk about, like, does wealth corrupt, and particularly material wealth? Does that create softness in society? And do winning civilizations always basically score an own goal by becoming extremely materially wealthy and becoming more egalitarian, and then end up fucking themselves over? Like, is that something we can avoid or not? And I won't give the answer now, but like there's a 50-page discussion in the book, as I mentioned. But specifically, if we know that the winter is coming, and if we know that there's going to be people, in charge of the house during the winter, we should try to build a structure for the house that is harder to burn down. So let me give you an analogy and a way to think about this. Think of a house representing the civilization, and it's built purely of wood. And you've got these generations that have built up the house because they know that every time there's a winter, a bunch of people die. So in order to protect ourselves, we need to build this beautiful house to keep ourselves warm, and it's got a fireplace. Now, let's assume that there comes a time when a generation is like, they're beneficiaries of this house, and they're too lazy because they have a bunch of firewood there, and they're like, you know what, who's going to chop more firewood? I'll just kick back, relax, and we'll just keep burning all the firewood, and it doesn't matter. And then all of a sudden they run out of firewood, and they're like, well, fuck, where are we going to get the firewood from? It's winter outside. No one wants to go outside and chop the wood. So they start like dismantling the house and putting it in the fireplace so they can keep themselves warm, because they don't give a fuck about what generation comes after. All they care about is staying warm now. And you can almost imagine the boomers are basically this generation. Let's just chew up the capital that we have, the house, and burn it. And then what happens is the next generation comes in, they freeze to death, and we're all fucked, right? Or, a bunch of people die, etc. So that's kind of like the weak men stage. So my hope, and this is the analogy I use in the book, there's a section called dampening the cycles, which is, can we limit the magnitude of damage that will happen when the winter comes around by creating a structure that is more steel, like it's steel with wood, with glass, with stone, with brick, with everything, so that when the monkeys inevitably are running the show, they can't burn everything down. And that is what I think is the biggest potential benefit of Bitcoin. Is not that we're going to avoid the cycles. The cycles are always going to be there. We'll always have a new era of weak men creating bad times, and we're going to have different problems at a different scale to deal with. But hopefully, on a strong economic standard, the amplitude of that damage won't be as great, because the capacity to print money won't exist, because the printing of the money is really the thing that happens at the tail end of a decay, right? If we had Bitcoin around the time of the French Revolution, perhaps there would have been a time when the Jacobins came in, perhaps maybe communism might have just started, but it would have been, in my opinion, nipped in the butt, because the the economic catastrophe would have been so great that those, like, in the absence of being able to print money, they would have basically met with reality sooner than where we are now. So that's my theory. Time is obviously going to tell. I think our intuition on this is probably correct, that Bitcoin's going to help a lot. But I also make it very clear that Bitcoin's a means to an end. It's a framework for beauty and excellence. But what we do with that framework is as important, or perhaps even more important, than just having the framework. So I'll stop there for a minute and see if you want to dig into anything.
Yeah, well, let's definitely dig into this further, because, again, I think it's safe to say that the framework exists, Bitcoin exists, it's running, it's operating, more people are adopting it year in and year out. The price is reflecting that as adoption continues. And I think one thing you're trying to get across in the book is that during this period, there's massive opportunity for people to take advantage of this shift. And if you put in the time to understand the virtues, and more importantly, actually live them via action, don't just talk about them and LARP about them, actually live as close to the virtues as you possibly can. And by doing so, during this interregnum, there's massive opportunity that you could take advantage of and really elevate your economic status and the status of hopefully your family for generations to come.
Yeah, this is going to be the greatest economic shift in human history, arguably speaking. Like, and in the shortest time, right? And it's going to be like, I would also say the interregnum is just going to be super messy. There's going to be people who take advantage for good reasons, and people who take advantage for bad reasons, right? Like during this period, there's going to be people who just, like, we're coming from an age of pure responsibility outsourcing, right? No one's responsible for shit anymore. Like the bank's responsible for their money. The government's responsible for their health and their fucking workplace and their I don't know, their what they learn about in school and what they learn about from the TV and all this sort of stuff is like everything's been outsourced. So we're going to move into an age where, Bitcoin demands radical responsibility. And there's like one of the, I believe, the strongest chapters in the book is the section on responsibility, and some of the headings there are things like the absence of responsibility and what that meant. Then I've got a chapter which is quite troll. It's called Agency and NPCs, and I say in there, responsibility and the ability to respond are both liveness tests. The difference between a living being with agency and an NPC is simply the virtue of responsibility. It differentiates the living from the zombies, right? So talk about that. I then talk about the psychology of responsibility. And this is very interesting when I pull in stuff from Alfred Adler, who's quite unknown in modern psychology, but his psychology basically is the psychology of responsibility. And it negates all of this like teleological bullshit about, I'm depressed and I'm this and I need a pill and I need therapy, and, the sort of the feminization. And funny enough, Alfred Adler is the only major Viennese Austrian psychologist who is forgotten. He's almost like he's like the Mises of the psychology place. And I think people are going to love that chapter specifically. Then I've got like energy of responsibility. Freedom is not a virtue. It's one of my favorite chapters in there. And then rights and responsibilities. But specifically, like, as we move through this interregnum, there's going to be people who take on all the duties and the responsibilities of being great, of being vital, of being virtuous. And there's going to be people who take advantage of the people going through the transition who are not familiar with responsibility. And we're going to see scams. We're going to see stealing. We're going to see cybercrimes. We're going to see shitcoinery. We're going to see all sorts of absolute mindless stupidity. Like I was reading the other 2 days ago, I got an email, like I'm signed up to this like trends. And like this marketer was explaining how there's this new trend of divorce parties. Like literally people celebrating their divorce. It's like, what the fuck is going on? And he was trying to frame it as it's good. Like it's very good for mental health because people are dealing with their divorce in a more healthy way. I was like, fuck am I reading here? Like, this is the most insane crap on the planet. But this is the kind of stupidity that's going to continue to happen. So it's going to be incumbent on us as we're going through this interregnum to really keep an eye on who were the people who acted appropriately during the interregnum. Because, like, you see, Livera and I were doing a podcast the other day, and he brought up how, I think it's, who's that guy, Lance Armstrong. He's now doing like a Solana coin. And like, why would you do that to your reputation? Like, first of all, it's just so stupid. But they're the people we need to watch out for, because in the future, they are 100% going to turn around and be like, oh, I never did that. No, the classic, every time the shitcoin cycle ends and Bitcoin starts to pump, you get all these idiots come out of the woodwork and be like, oh, it was always Bitcoin first. It's like, no, you weren't, asshole. You were just like sitting there shitcoining. So we need to be vigilant, keep an eye on those, because it's going to be up to us to exclude them from positions of influence later, because you don't want that kind of character seeping into civilization once more, because that's the exact kind of character who lets the barbarians through the gates, right? Like, they will sell their reputation, they will sell their honor for coin. They are the Judas of civilization. I think we need to be really careful of them. But yeah, anyway, that's my comments on interregnum.
No, that's I mean, we've seen it time and time again, especially in the world of shitcoins, where people are willing to burn their reputation. And something, I mean, it's part of our pitch at 1031 too, which is, I mean, going and raising money from LPs who are looking at all these crypto funds, making insane returns because they're getting allocations to pre-mines and then dumping on retail. It's something we have to address when talking to people who are thinking about allocating to our fund. And that's sort of our pitch, is name our funds low time preference funds for a reason. And yes, you may be able to get quick gains in the world of crypto. However, it comes at a high cost, which is your reputation. And even though you can get quick gains and returns in the world of crypto, we still believe that long term, if you lower your time preference and really hone in on the generational businesses that are being built because they're building infrastructure around Bitcoin and going to increase the utility and the accessibility of the network for a world that is yet to completely adopt it, like that is, it's like the marshmallow test. It's like, yeah, you can have 2 marshmallows now in the world of crypto, but you're going to get a tummy ache, and people aren't going to want to do business with you in a decade from now.
Absolutely. And even beyond that, it's like, which side of history do you want to be on? Do you want to be remembered as the dickhead who just like helped accelerate the decline and just like extracted? Or do you want to be a part of the people who helped construct a new foundation and framework that is sound and that is going to be around for the next 1,000 years? Like, it's a question of legacy, which is, an extension of reputation, obviously. Yeah, I love that, and that's why, like, I've got huge respect for what you guys are doing, at the fund and the other Bitcoin fund. It's like, it's not easy. I appreciate that probably more than most, because when I was building Amber in Australia back in the day, like, we were the first Bitcoin only DCA app in the world, and we were raising money in 2017 during the peak of the ICO period. And every investor that I spoke to just laughed at me. They're like, why aren't you doing a coin? I'm like, because we don't need one. Like, so why would I do a coin? Yeah, but you can make free money. I was like, yeah, but I'd be ripping people off. I was like, we don't need a fucking coin. And then they're like, well, are you going to have Ethereum and Dash in there, like, so you can trade between? I was like, no, it's a fucking savings app. I want people to acquire Bitcoin. And I just got laughed at for a whole year before I could raise any money. And it turned out to be the right thing to do. Like, after us, then the whole Bitcoin only industry started to flourish. And, I think the same thing's actually going to happen now in the Nostr space, right? Like, people are laughing at Nostr. They're like, oh yeah, it's a bunch of nerds and, doing weird shit, pretending to rebuild Twitter. But what they don't realize is, like, Nostr is it's the identity layer for the internet. And it's even more than identity layer. It's like it's the social layer of the internet, because the the design of Nostr is such that you can append metadata to an identity and literally build a social graph. So you can like take what now exists in application at the application level, which is identity and the social graph. You can push that down to the protocol level, and you can build entirely new applications where the creators, the content people, like the audience actually owns not just their data, because I don't give a fuck about owning data. Like, they own their identity and they own their social graph. That's super, 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 super important. And there's something there that is really intertwined with reputation. Like, Nostr is going to be a place where your digital self, your digital identity, starts to build reputation. And it reminds me actually of another section in the book, which is called Praxis. So after I go through the integration section of the book, part 4 is Praxis, and it looks at things like rites of passage and training and the Mannerbund, which means in German an alliance of men. It looks at how to settle disputes. I've even got like a section in there about dueling. But then, most importantly, there's a section called the Bitcoiner's Arsenal, and I go through the weapons of the Bitcoiners. So things like your keys. In Bitcoin, your keys are the centerpiece. They're similar to the sword of the samurai. How you forge, in other words, derive, store, and treat these keys determines whether or not the Bitcoin will remain in your custody. So then I talk about nodes, mining and validating. Then I look at Bitcoin adjacent protocols, where I go into Nostr, identity and reputation, privacy, then words, spoken or written. Like, if you must have something to say and then know how to say it, which is a Jordan Peterson thing. Then building physical networks, the art of the ritual, movement, self-defense, programming and digital product skills, entrepreneurship. So like, I cover all of these things that we need to develop as, I guess, custodians of the next era of humanity. Like, it's not just enough to smash by on your favorite Bitcoin DCA app. Like, there's many other things that you need to do. Like, if your life revolves around trolling people on Twitter and buying some Bitcoin and laughing about how virtuous you are, you're a fucking idiot. Like, there's 100 other things that you need to do in order to become a man or a woman of value. And that's there's a big section in the book about that.
Yeah, and again, going back to this low time preference and the fact that it's hard because you see people laughing at you, people discarding you, and it could lead to a level of discouragement that maybe pushes you away from striving for the virtuous goal of doing the right thing consistently over time. But I think particularly in the beauty chapter, you highlight, like, this is how beauty actually emerges, is by objectively seeking the truth and staying on the path of truth. And you'll find if you do that consistently throughout time, you'll wake up with a beautiful legacy. And if you're building in the physical world or the digital world, you'll find that the products, the fruits of your labor manifesting in the physical or digital world are beautiful in and of themselves, because that beauty is imbued in everything that you do, because you're seeking truth and objectivity.
Yeah, beauty is a big topic that I've gone down the rabbit hole in the exploration of this book, and you nailed it there with your description. Like, I gave a talk in BTC Prague called "Beauty Will Save the World," and it as usual, it triggered a bunch of people. But my whole point of it was that, like, beauty takes time, and beauty is not subjective. Like, and a lot of Bitcoiners make this mistake because they correctly realize that material value is subjective. And that's true. And that's, like, you can almost think of it as like the base of the mountain. Like, that's the foundation. And understanding that all material value is subjective is extremely important for a society, because that's 101 economic literacy. But beauty and truth, they transcend the material. They are higher. They reach for something else. So, like, I think I've got a section in the book where I say that, if the highest good was the peak of a mountain, the two slopes that lead up to it are beauty and truth. And beauty is specifically, like, it's both simultaneously objective and subjective. And I'm not sure there's anything else with this kind of paradoxical quality, right? Like maybe the divine, right? Or truth. I would argue those sort of three are in the same thing. But, beauty's paradoxical nature extends. It's like it's both everlasting and fleeting. It's both like, everlasting in terms of a galaxy and fleeting in terms of a snowflake, right? It's both powerful and fragile. Like think of a volcano and think of a flower, right? It's dangerous and nurturing. You think of a male lion like attacking a gazelle versus the female lion nurturing her cubs, right? Like beauty is found both in war and peace. It's found in conflict and cooperation. It's found in violence and love. And there's a beautiful quote from Wolfgang von Goethe who says, "Music is liquid architecture. Architecture is frozen music." So it's like beauty is like a really profound, deep topic, and I think people can get this chapter for free if they go to bushidoofbitcoin.com and just download the free chapters. But yeah, like ultimately, to construct or to build or to create anything of beauty takes time, and that's like whether it's your like a beautiful body, like you need to go to the gym, you need to build it, you need to construct it. Whether it's a child, like the process of just the 9 months the woman carries the child, and then the process of raising it, like literally 20 years, a quarter or a fifth of your life, depending on how long you live, as a parent, goes into bringing this child in. And whether it's the cathedral that takes 300 years to build, like we were in Barcelona the other week and looking at the Sagrada Familia, the beautiful cathedral there, and that's like 200 years in, like or 150 years in, whatever it is. It's phenomenal, but the attention to detail is next level. Like, so beauty fundamentally takes time, whereas ugliness, which is the visceral opposite of beauty, like you recognize beauty. When you see beauty, you know it. Like I don't have to tell you like a sunset is beautiful. Like you're drawn to it, you're attracted to it because it is in line with life. There's something transcendent about it. And in fact, like, you look at the fractals that make up the universe, whether it's numbers, whether it's like sacred geometry, whether it's like the pi and the golden ratio, all this sort of stuff. Like there's something about beauty, like musical octaves. There's something about beauty that is transcendent, and you recognize it. And as I said, ugliness you also recognize. And ugliness is the thing that just takes a second. Like whether you chop your dick off for transgender surgery, like, or you bomb a city and turn it into rubble, like these things are ugly. And we inherently recognize the two. So anyway, coming back to time preference, it's beauty is the ultimate in low time preference. Like to create something of true beauty takes time, takes dedication, takes passion, takes sacrifice, takes energy, takes effort, it takes all of these things. And with a bit of luck, if we move on to a Bitcoin standard and people's time preference starts to shift, there's a strong argument to be made there for the development of a more beautiful world. But we just have to, as human beings, as Bitcoiners, as leaders, as all of these things, we have to recognize that beauty is fundamentally more, it's subjective and objective. It's simultaneously both of these things. And we have to, I think a lot of Bitcoiners forget this, or they gloss over it, or they, as I said earlier, they get caught in the paradigm of everything is subjective, including the non-material, which is fundamentally wrong. We have to understand that that's the case. And like the benefactors, the people who built the beautiful medieval and Renaissance cities of Italy, for example, that still 300, 400, 500 years later attract people to them. Who were they? They were the rich, powerful benefactors, the Medicis, the families that produced wealth, that believed in greatness, that funded the Da Vinci's, the Michelangelos, the Donatellos, and all of these people to produce beautiful things. And I think we're going to come back into that time, and we just have to change our psychology as the next leaders of civilization to go and produce beautiful things.
Yeah. And that's going to be hard. It's going to be a journey, right? Because people have become so dependent on the government to build a lot of the public goods, if you will, the architecture, the roads, whatever it may be. They literally have been psyoped into believing that the government needs to do all these things. And that's one thing I'm very happy to have Tur Demeester in Austin, and his focus, him and Kelly Lannon, Al's Lacrosse, others, Michael Goldstein, focusing on urbanism and how Bitcoiners can bring back good urbanism to the world by deploying the capital that they accumulate once Bitcoin hits a certain price. But we're literally going to have to rediscover like how you actually identify an artist, fund him, and just say, hey, go build something beautiful. Rip out the zoning and permitting laws that exist that make it almost impossible to do some of these things from a legal perspective right now. Like we're going to have to, again, I think part of the interregnum, and correct me if I'm wrong, is like a rediscovery of these things that have been lost because people have been lulled into an apathetic and complacent state.
Yeah, we need to learn how to walk again, man. You know, we've sort of been just like this disabled dude in a coma, and now we've got to get up and we've got to do our physiotherapy, and we've got to find it because it's in us, it's in our blood, like our ancestors did it. Like we didn't just like pop up out of nowhere. Like we're part of a long lineage of people who have done this, and we can do it as well.
Agreed. I definitely think we can, and I think we're already in the process of doing. I'm not sure if you saw Tur's presentation at the Bitcoin Urbanism meetup from earlier this year, but he already has like an actionable roadmap to how we can actually do this. And that's actually one thing we've been joking about, but now I'm trying to think more seriously about it. Is like something as simple as like a brick factory here in the United States. Like there's not enough brick factories to produce the bricks that would be needed to bring back beautiful architecture to American cities. And it's like Tur and I've been joking about it, but like maybe it turns into something more serious where it's like, should we actually like fund a brick factory to supply these contractors that are building this type of architecture?
Dude, this touches on an old topic that I used to talk to people about, which is the move away from bits to atoms, right? And I think Peter Thiel spoke about this a while back, is that because the world's been so demented and so financialized, like we've like deformed all the way into bits. Like everything is about bits. Like build the next fucking financial app or trading app or gambling app or dick pic app or fucking social media app or banking app or whatever. Like everything is like digital, VR, VR, like AI. It's all 99% useless. And, you know, there is some usefulness in there, but it's all like hot air, right? Whereas if we get on a stronger economic system and something with lower time preference, I think the desire to build in the space in the plane of atoms is going to come back again, to engineer that, because, you know, we're still flying in fucking jets and airplanes and everything that are 50 years old. Like we've made no progress there. You know, buildings are not getting more beautiful; they're getting more ugly in many ways. You know, there's obviously exceptions, like, and you know, everything that we say here on this podcast is not like you know, a blanket rule. Like there is always exceptions, there's always bright spots, and it's those bright spots that we need to lean into. But to your point about like funding a brick factory, dude, these are all the things, like at some point, the delta of the Bitcoin gain is going to diminish, right? Like when Bitcoin's 1 million, to move to 2 million is going to take a little bit of time, right? And that's only 100% move. Like, but from 100 grand to 1 million, that's 1,000% move. So that's where all the gains are going to be made. But once we get to a position where we're, you know, again, more economically influential, which is the whole fucking purpose of this book. The whole purpose of this book is to get people in the right psychology to go and make the bets that you just mentioned, to build the big brick factory, to fund the artist, to go and, you know, build the statues, to build the businesses that are bricks and mortar, to build the new jet airline, to do all this sort of stuff. Like that's how it's all going to happen. And in many ways, this is why obviously Bitcoin is such a significant shelling point for this evolution. It's not even a revolution, like this evolution of human society, is that as we win, the cultural battle, we also win the economic battle. And so long as we don't, I don't know, become a bunch of degenerate turds by getting rich from Bitcoin, so long as we can like keep ourselves in check and once again, hopefully use the stuff that I've written here and the stuff that Tour is doing, you know, your podcast and all this sort of stuff as a reminder to be better people, to be more virtuous in the true sense, not fucking virtue signaling, right? Like in the true sense of virtue, which is behavior and principle, we have a chance to do something good with that wealth. Like it reminds me of a story of Alexander the Great. So like throughout the book, I draw from like, there's lots of stories about Alexander. There's lots of stories about Julius Caesar and like the greats throughout history who literally shaped and bent the arc of eternity towards their vision. He asks his generals to bury him with one hand out of the casket to prove that you don't take anything with you, that it's more important to leave a legacy after you die, because there's no point in just hoarding all this fucking money and then doing nothing with it. That's the definition of a Scrooge. And you know, even in our stories, like the Scrooge is the character that is not respected, that is not loved, that is not revered. The one who is the truly powerful individual, the truly beautiful and ascendant and great individual is the one who is magnanimous, who uses his wealth that he built, not other people's wealth, the wealth that he amassed, that he built, all that was passed from his family and he made greater. He uses it for the purpose of keeping the fight against entropy going, because that's what we're here for. Like if we don't do anything, entropy takes over. But if we do something, we can still climb the mountain, we can still build the cathedral, we can still reach for the stars, which is, I think, a big part of what the duty of being human is.
Mm-hmm. And so that in mind, do you think, again, you mentioned the journey from 100,000 to a million is 1,000% gain, million to 2 million, 100% gain. Like, do you think there's a timing aspect to all this? Like, are we in the planning phase of the interregnum where we should be developing and sharpening this mindset and these virtues and waiting opportunistically for the time to be ripe to go out and actually deploy all this capital?
100%, man. Like, you know, it takes a samurai 15 to 20 years to earn his sword, to earn his armor, right? Like, it's going to take us a decade to earn the right to deploy this capital effectively beyond just the fucking apps that we're building. Because today we're just building apps. Like, my long-term plan, 15, 20 years, I want to go and take over Macedonia and I want to turn it into the Dubai or the Singapore of Europe. The possibility to do that, and it sounds like hyperbole, but I'm literally no shit. I want to do what Bukele did in Salvador, what Lee Kuan Yew did in Singapore, in Macedonia. It's a small enough country to do it. It's strategically located. There's a bunch of benefits there. And those kind of territories, it's going to be up to people like us to go and reform these things, to rebuild them, to restructure them, to create them. And that's going to require not only like capital, it's going to require know-how, it's going to require preparation, it's going to require deep diving, like exactly what you mentioned, Tour and Goldstein and everyone are doing, like thinking about urban planning, thinking about investing in bricks, brick and mortar, literally businesses, thinking about governance structures, thinking about how things need to operate, how leadership look like, what hiring people looks like, what building teams looks like, what building organizations looks like. All of this sort of stuff is us in training. And the cornerstone to all of those is not just the economic element of Bitcoin, but is the psychology. The only way to do this is to inspire other people, because you're not going to do it alone. One thing and you and I spoke about this in, I think, a previous podcast where we spoke about like the real definition of friends, right? Like someone that you would bleed with, right? The people who all changed the world, like Alexander went out and, you know, blows my mind, on foot from Macedonia, from the mountains of Macedonia to fucking India. Like most people would die today in the modern world just walking that distance, but let alone like battling multiple, like maybe 20, 30, 40 literal fucking wars and battles along the way killing, stabbing, getting stabbed, arrows in your lungs and all this sort of shit, going up the Hindu Kush in the middle of the winter, like surviving all of that and getting there. The kind of fortitude that necessitated was only possible. Sure, he was a man that had that sort of spark inside him, but it was done with his manner bund, what I mentioned yesterday, the alliance of men, the people around him. And that's exactly what we need to now start thinking about as Bitcoiners. Is like we need to build these alliances, and as a team, as a, call it a decentralized organization, we need to go and claim, we need to take over, and we need to lead our way out of the psychological, spiritual, physical, physiological dark ages that we're in today. And that's going to come as preparation. It's preparation time now, because sometime in the next decade, I don't know if it's going to be 5 years or if it's going to be post 2030, whatever, but my guess is sort of the interregnum is like the next decade or whatever, or at least the core part of the interregnum. 2030 onwards, man, we've got to fucking build, bro. We got to build.
Yeah. And it's funny too, I think we're the same age. I've been in Bitcoin for 11 years now, and like the timing is a bit eerie how it lines up. Like at 2030, I'll be
Right?
almost 40 years old. Hopefully I've developed enough wisdom to go out and effectively deploy this capital. And I think for us millennials, particularly, the timing is really interesting. I've got, at that point, my kids will be almost teenagers, and or not almost teenagers, double digits. And it'll be, as a father, particularly thinking like, it really excites me if that timeline does prove to be correct. Like, hopefully be a good role model for my kids, like while I'm in my 40s and they're developing into their teenage years. So like, oh, dad actually did something, and they were able to observe it and like watch it. And it's something that I think about.
Absolutely, man. That's like one of the most exciting things. Like in the book, I say, like there's a section right at the end called "A New Heroic Age," and in there I talk literally about like there's quotes like from Alex Carroll: "Man cannot remake himself without suffering, for he's both marble and the sculptor." But the core message here is that something new is rising. It's a new energy. And a new age, and we have the opportunity to like we simultaneously drew the short straw, and like we drew the short straw, like we had to endure clown world and like see the greatest stupidities in human history like come to bear, but we also get to be the ones who kind of live through that interregnum and set the foundation. So in many ways, we're going to be the founding fathers of something even greater than what America is today. Like, there's this idea that when Rome collapsed, like it didn't entirely collapse, obviously, the quote unquote barbarians, which were at that point basically the Germanic tribes who had learnt everything that they could learn from the Romans. They were civilized barbarians. So they had the structure of the Romans, but they also had the vitality of a barbarian. So they were the perfect kind of archetype to take over. And they were more nomadic. They were strong. They were young. They had massive like birth rate. They had this like warrior spirit about them, but they had also developed these virtues like courage, like compassion, like self-control. They built this sort of culture, and they took Rome and they set the foundations for what would become the modern West. And what came of that was literally the USA. The USA is the pinnacle of what you would call the Faustian West, the post-Roman West, which took about 1,500 years to develop and reach its zenith, right? And you look at the magnitude of power between what the US is versus what Rome was. Even though Rome was extraordinarily powerful, the US is like 1,000 times more powerful, or 100,000 times more powerful. What comes next? We are now the barbarians. We've learnt everything that came from those who came before us, like the prior founding fathers of the US, the Mises of the world, the Spenglers of the world, and all this sort of stuff. We're extracting the thinking and the civility and the structure from them, but we're coming up with a new fucking energy that is barbarian-like, that is hungry to claim, to build, to create, to conquer. We're going to combine those two. And funny enough, a lot of us either traveled or nomadic in some sense, or we are flexible. We have the ability to move if we need to, or at the very least, our probably the word is we are more sovereign, right? Which is what the Germanic tribes are. So there's almost like an echo of that period. And the foundations that we established today, in 1,000 years, the civilization that will come then will be, in turn, 1,000 times or 100,000 times more powerful than what the US is today, which is, in other words, we're setting the foundations for going to the stars. And I truly believe that. I know it sounds like hyperbole. I know it sounds like I've been smoking crack or whatever, like I've been reading too much Nietzsche, but like, I truly believe that's the point that we're at. And we get to be the one, we're the Charlemagnes and the Theodorics of the modern age, right? Like, those guys established the West that we now stand upon, and you and I are going to establish the next one, which is a big thing to say.
Yeah. And it's a great natural segue into Satlantis and the sort of goal there to begin creating these networks and these communities that will hopefully be leveraged to coordinate all this activity when the timing is right.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, this is to segue into this, it was an accidental project. I kind of mentioned it at the beginning of our talk, but we spent basically 2023 trying to build out a language model for Bitcoin, and we succeeded in that. At least succeeded in building it, because Spirit of Satoshi is quite strong. But what we didn't succeed in is figuring out how to monetize it, particularly because the AI space is just like, unless you go and raise 20, 50 million, 100 million from a bunch of VCs and like basically LARP about making money and LARP about AGI, you're not really going to succeed. And, we were a young startup and just couldn't find a way to really make money out of this thing in a scalable fashion. And one of us had the idea of, hey, should we do a travel concierge with a, like, I go to El Salvador and I ask an AI chatbot, hey, where can I spend Bitcoin? What are the laws? This and that. And as we dug into that, we're like, it's not really the right UX for it. So we kind of like parked the idea for a little bit. And I looked at building it as like a side project, as like, I thought maybe I can just build a website that's just a directory of Bitcoin circular economies. People want to know what's going on in different places. Here you go. And we were going to call it Bitcoin Nomad List. And then we were going to call it Destination Bitcoin. And the thing about it was, we said, okay, look, we don't want to just do what Nomad List is doing, which is just aggregates and scrapes a bunch of data off the internet and kind of gives you scoring on different cities, and it like plugs into the Meetup API, and it just kind of gives nomads an idea of what's going on in different cities, qualitatively speaking. We said, look, we want to have local ambassadors on the ground help rate the city, different elements, the walkability, the safety, the drinking water, the ride sharing, all this sort of stuff, and give people like a real true sense of what's good about the city and what's not. And then we thought, how can we validate who these ambassadors are? And we're like, Twitter, and we're like, that's, the API sucks and, it's not great. And then we thought, what about Nostr? And, that's an interesting place. And then we started digging down the Nostr rabbit hole. And the more we dug, the more we realized, holy shit, like there's actually a big product here. And then the name Satlantis is obviously a play on words. It's like Atlantis as this sort of promised land destination, and throw an S in front of it to give it a bit of a Bitcoin flavor. We stumbled into this thing, which is like I don't even know what to call it. Like, we're building something new in the same way as like Facebook didn't really have an analog 20 years ago. We're doing something which doesn't have an analog today. The closest thing I can think of is it's a travel, nomading, and community social network. So it's almost like you take the travel element of TripAdvisor and Nomad List, you mash it with the social element of an Instagram, then the merchant map and places of a Google Places, and then like the meetup.com piece. Like, if you take the best of those and put it together into a product, you have something which looks and feels very different, particularly for, I guess, this idea of the network state or the nomad or the traveling and communities and all this sort of stuff. Because then you can, by building it on Nostr, for example, you can take the social graph, which is where the relevance comes from. Because this is a big problem in the travel and community spaces. Like, content is not relevant. Like, if I want to go to Austin, or let's just say you and I both want to go to Buenos Aires in Argentina, you and I are going to see the exact same recommendations on TripAdvisor as everybody else will see. And it doesn't make any fucking sense, because you and I are different people, and you and I are different to everybody else. Now, you and I might have similar interests, which, if you had a dynamic application, which is what we're trying to do here with Satlantis, is if let me use maybe Buenos Aires is a bad example. Like, let's say I'm coming to Austin, and because I follow you on Nostr on social media, and I'm going out to see a restaurant, like, if you've been there, or someone in your social circle has been there and they've rated it, I should see that review before I see anything else. Whereas on Google, like, I'm getting reviews for steak places or a meat place or a sushi place or whatever from people I don't fucking know. I don't know if it's real. I don't know if they have the same likes as me or anything like that. So it's all just like static, irrelevant, or fake. Like, that's the entire, basically, internet now, what it's become. Nostr gives us an opportunity to completely transform that. And particularly with Satlantis, we are going after the travel and community vertical and trying to build something fundamentally new. And I've got an article that I published a couple of weeks ago called Nostr Social as a Service. And this is my attempt as a non-technical person to try and tell product people, normies, and CEOs and investors, like, hey, this is what Nostr is. Nostr isn't just a Twitter clone. Nostr is a social graph as a service. Like, if you can take the concept of a social graph and plug it into other applications, you can bring relevance and dynamism to any application. That's specifically what we're trying to do. And, as you kind of alluded to, is if the world moves more and more and more towards this kind of city-state structure where the state becomes more accountable, at least economically speaking, and then downstream of that, politically speaking, what is the mechanism that the state might operate on? And I think it's going to operate on something like the flavor of Satlantis. Now, that's obviously 10, 20 years down the track. In the short term, there's other goals. But anyway, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but that's basically what it is.
No, yeah, I completely agree that people are sleeping on Nostr, really pigeonholing it to this social media the usurper, where it's much more than that. It's really about the communications and, like you mentioned, the social graph being exported. Because you think about somebody like you building a company in Satlantis, like, Nostr's got years of the social graph building and reputations being built, and you're simply able to implement that into your product out of the box. So in terms of like bootstrapping the network effect for individual companies, it's people do not grasp the gravity of what that means for people building new businesses in the future.
People are 100% sleeping on it. Can I ask, is this going to be visible on video? Like, should we do like a little walkthrough for people who want to watch it? So this is what it looks like to give people a bit of an idea. So it's like, you go to the homepage, and the web experience is very much like a directory. So you get a sense of what the cities are, and the cities can be ordered by ratings, and I'll explain how the ratings work in a second, or by cost of living, etc. And you get a bit of a high-level glimpse of chats and events and useful apps and merchants and all this sort of stuff. But when you click into a city, you go into the city page, and this is like one of the sort of flagship features, is you can discover a city now dynamically. So you've got profile scores, chats, events, merchants, all this sort of stuff. You get a high-level view of the scoring. You see all the people here. Now, everyone can follow a city. And this is really one of the cool concepts that Nostr makes possible, is like, a city is an event type, and then everything associated to that city can be marked as an event type. So all of a sudden you have this like rich digital representation of a city that any Nostr client can read and represent, which becomes extraordinarily powerful. But in that city, you've got people. So you can actually see. There's probably people here that you already follow in the city and you didn't even know. Like I know how many times I'm going to a different city and I'm just like on Telegram asking, hey, who knows who here, there. It's so fucking like frictionful. Whereas like here, this solves it in one fell swoop. And then there's this section here where you've got like the posts, and we've got a city feed, which is like a mixture of Pinterest and Instagram comes together. And this is super powerful because people can post on here, and they can post anything from, you know, I went to this farmer's market, went to this restaurant, caught up with some friends, beautiful sunset, whatever, right? Let people post about locations. But it also listens to the entire Nostr network. So if I'm on Primal and I'm in Madrid and I went to a restaurant and I like took a photo of a thing and said Madrid, it'll come up in the Madrid feed, which is absolutely mind-boggling because it's like, imagine you could do that between Twitter and Instagram. Like, it doesn't work, right? So you can go into chat, so you can find like relevant groups. Like at the moment, all of this finding relevant group stuff happens on WhatsApp. So people are kind of like split on WhatsApp and Meetup and Facebook groups and all over the place. You can find your events, so local events. You can see what useful apps are in place. You can see what merchants are there. And the most powerful thing about this city page is that, let's say you're interested in surfing and I'm interested in food. The kind of content I'm going to see, the kind of chats and events and posts and everything that I'm going to see, the kind of people that I'm going to see are more related to food. For you, it's going to be more related to surfing. To someone else, it's going to be more related to Bitcoin. So for the first time ever, the city page can actually be dynamic. And that's never happened before on the internet with respect to a specifically like a travel product. And then, you know, you can go into scores and get a sense for the scores. And the scores are a mixture of quantitative data online, a mixture of ambassador surveys, and a mixture of the actual community, people living there rating everything. So you get this kind of crowdsourced on the ground rating of, you know, what's the cost of living like? Is it safe? You know, can I walk around? Is it a walkable city? What's the, you know, is there greenery? Is the infrastructure expensive? Is it family friendly? Is it Bitcoin friendly? All this sort of stuff. And then the mobile experience, and I think we're probably going to be the first ones to do this on Nostr, is like we're going to have a visual image and video centric Nostr profile, which looks, you know, obviously a little bit more like Instagram, and it'll be a far more curated view for people who want to build that kind of a profile. And then my favorite feature is this this merchant experience. So merchants will now have a page where traditionally they were on Instagram to build an audience, right? A merchant can now build an audience in the same place, so they can post, they can build an audience, they can build trust with their community, and they can have all their information, which they traditionally had on a separate app over on Google, and they can have their ratings and reviews in the one place, and they can build an audience and ratings and reviews and information and everything like that, trust with the community and all of that in one place. And as I said earlier, the best thing about the reviews is if I go to Austin and I'm following you, I'm going to see your review long before I see anybody else's, which I not only trust more, but I know is real. So we have an opportunity to really like transform the entire web, transform the entire way people like actually find things that are relevant to them, discover places, find community, connect with people, and all this sort of stuff, which to me is like ultra powerful. And as you kind of pointed to, it's like it might form, like if you take this out 5, 10, 15 years, it might form the basis of these new states that are going to be developed. And I mean, I could imagine, I was joking with Parker Lewis in Prague, and I said, dude, let's make you one of the ambassadors in Austin. And I said, as this thing grows, if you have 1 million followers in Austin, there's your ticket to becoming the mayor of Austin. It's like, yeah, it's a good idea. So like, it's going to be interesting. Like Nostr is going to really change the world here, honestly.
We need Parker made the bet he would not be using Nostr until block height 1,050,000. So we're gonna have to get him to.
We will
basically lose that bet. Give Matt Odell 1 million sats and get building on Nostr. I think he is beginning to come around on it too, because I think we had a conversation in the Commons with another Bitcoiner, and I think Hal Finney wrote this piece in the 90s about remailers and the need for like communications and a monetary protocol to actually make them viable. Now with the emergence of Bitcoin and Nostr and combining these two protocols, like it's actually possible to create that
100%.
sci-fi future that he envisioned decades ago. And that's, I think, again, going back to like low time preference and patience and actually putting in the hard work and building, I think the emergence of Nostr has really highlighted the high time preference and idiocy of something like Web 3.0, where everything needs a token. It's like, no, you just need these protocols that can interact with each other, and then you need to create unique ways in which to combine them, which I think Nostr and Bitcoin is really proven to the market right now.
100%. And I think a really important piece here is that these protocols need to work in layers. Like you look at the internet. The internet is the infrastructure layer, TCP, IP, and then the application layer, right? And then apps built on top of that. So the application layer being like HTTPS, etc. Bitcoin is the monetary protocol, and it is where the token is. That's where the money exists. And it doesn't do anything other than that. Now, you can have abstracted layers on top of Bitcoin, but largely speaking, there's a monetary layer with a dedicated function. And then Nostr is the identity and communications layer. And it's really important. Like some people are like, oh, Nostr is stateless. It doesn't solve the data problem. It's like the data problem will be solved by the market. Some people will host their data on AWS. Some people host it on their own computer at home. Some people host it on IPFS. Some people host it on, their Start9, whatever. Like the data, there's no decentralized solution for data other than the marketplace. And depending on your use case, that will determine the kind of data setup you use. Like if you've got something that is extremely sensitive, you'd be an idiot to host it on AWS, obviously. But if you have something that is not sensitive, like travel data, who cares if it's on AWS? That doesn't matter. But what's important is that the identity is owned by the user, and that you do it in a way that is, as I said, stateless, and that sort of enables infinite scale. That's what Nostr does. It gives you an identity and a communication layer that is infinitely scalable because it's not bogged down by state. And that kind of beautiful layering, and I almost envision now you've got like 4 layers to the internet today, and then with Bitcoin it's layer number 5, and with Nostr it's layer number 6. You have, almost the perfect internet. We won't need another layer for decades or maybe centuries, and I don't even know what that next layer is going to be, but we have it all solved now. And to your point, like this is going to take some time, and the people building this are actually building real shit, whereas the dumbasses in Web3, they're trying to compress Bitcoin and Nostr into one layer, and they're getting the worst of both worlds, whereas we've done it really intelligently, and we're going to get the best of both worlds. In fact, as I'm speaking, that's like an analogy to the internet. The internet was a stack of protocols, whereas the corporations competing with the internet were trying to build an information superhighway that was one product, right? AOL was one product that wanted to do everything. Microsoft's information superhighway was one product that wanted to do everything, whereas the internet, stack of protocols, open, people built on it, all of the value went there. And I believe it's going to be the same thing with Nostr and Bitcoin, because it's just fucking better. Simple as that.
Don't sleep on Nostr, freaks. It's funny. It's interesting to see things like Farcaster out there, like posturing like it's like the next layer of social media, but you need like an email to sign up. You have to use USDC, and they have raised a lot of money. But again, it's another example. It's indicative of the fact that people are confused, like raising hundreds of millions of dollars for that protocol, and everybody's overlooking Nostr and laughing at people building on it. But it reminds me of Bitcoin like a decade ago.
Does.
Despite the fact that people are sleeping on Nostr, not only that, but openly deriding it and saying that it's dead on arrival. And then you look at what people are building, like yourself and others, and it's undeniable that there's an explosion of growth and development that's happening that many people are just completely unaware of. And I think it's going to shock the world a decade from now when we look up and see what's been built.
Yeah, the next couple of years are going to be wild, man. Like between now and 2030, especially, like it's going to be like a tectonic shift. And all of us who are awake during this period, like as you were saying before, it's like this is the preparation, right? 2030 comes around, people are going to be like, where the fuck did these Bitcoiners come from? Like, Noster, Bitcoin, this, that. They're going to be like, oh shit, we missed the boat. But we're going to be the captains of the ship at that time. I look forward to that.
I do as well. It's always a pleasure, sir. I love these deep dives. We put out 90 minutes on the calendar. We're approaching 120, and
oh wow, shit, that far? Okay.
we can always. I feel like we could talk for hours about all this stuff. But no, these. I think this is particularly the Bushido of Bitcoin, and again, some people could say, "Oh, like, the gall to basically say that you've identified the virtues and these are the things that people should go after." Like, who are you to tell people that? But I think it's very important, again, going back to one of the points that we discussed, which is timing is going to be crucial in terms of actually being able to affect change, and preparation is part of the timing. And to prepare, you have to know what you're preparing for in the first place. And I think the virtues and the framework which you put forth in the Bushido of Bitcoin, at least the parts that I've read, makes a lot of sense, and is something that every Bitcoiner should be thinking of, is mentally preparing for this and recognizing that if you want to fix the world and actually bring back beauty and sanity, you have to live and be aligned with the truth. And
You have to be an
versions.
example. Yeah. You know, the change starts with you, and to anyone thinking it's like, oh, you know, how the fuck does Svetski know what these virtues are? It's like, it's not me. I didn't create any of these virtues. I just figured out that there was an overlap between the virtues embodied by the greatest cultures that built the greatest civilizations. So I've been more an observer. So at best, I was the guy who just spent 2 years, and in fact, probably most of my life, sensing this and then going and doing the deep dive and doing the work to say, hey, there's actually something here. Because when there is great overlap, Livera said this to me, he's like, look, you know, Saifedean, when he did his research on the Bitcoin standard, realized that all of the cultures around the world converged on gold, not because someone said so, but because it worked. So if multiple great cultures previously had converged on similar virtues, there's probably something worth, you know, listening to there. You know, this isn't the Bushido of Svetski. This is the Bushido of Bitcoin, which is a new socioeconomic standard, requires a new way of being that draws from the principles and the wisdom of the past and then projects forward. That's how I would try and sum it up. And you know, for those who are interested, like this is definitely a different book. Like if you like history, if you like psychology, if you like, you know, unpopular opinions and things that, you know, you're not going to find in another Bitcoin book. There's not much in here about like Mises or Austrian economics or all of that. It's like more Spengler and Julius Evola and Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, and you know, people who shifted and I guess I like the framing, like bent the arc of eternity towards their vision. Like they transformed history, and we write about them and remember them today, like Christ and all of that sort of stuff. It's really heavy with that stuff. And yeah, if people want to check it out, bushidoofbitcoin.com. Watch the trailer. That's the one piece that I can tell everybody. Watch the trailer. It's going to blow your fucking mind. It'll blow you away. Helliand and I spent a couple months making that. And you can get free chapters on there. Just chuck your email and you get a bunch of free chapters. It's not like a tight-ass single free chapter. You get like a bunch. And you can pre-order it on Geyser for a discount. And it's also on Kickstarter for a discount. There's some special perks in there as well for those who want to get it. And then with a bit of luck, it'll be done with the editors and the typesetters and everything. It'll be shipping in September. But if you get it on the pre-sale, you get it first before everybody on Amazon gets it. So that's my shill for Bushido.
We will link to all that in the show notes. Mr. Svetski, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. Excited to see the book in the wild. Can't wait to get it on my bookshelf in the Commons.
Thank you, my friend, Mr. Ben. Thank you again. Really appreciate everything, buddy. Always love this.
Peace and love, freaks. Take care.